I spent 7 years working as a private tutor for a billionaire's son, solely to groom him into the whistleblower who would destroy his father's empire. Revenge is often depicted as a crime of passion, a gunshot in the dark, a slashed tire, a leaked photo. But true revenge, the kind that leaves a crater where a legacy used to be, is an art form. It requires patience, it requires access, and most importantly, it requires a vessel. My vessel was named Julian. When I met him, he was 11 years old, a lonely, awkward boy living in a 20,000 square foot mausoleum of marble and glass. His father, Richard Sterling, not his real name, but you'd know it if I said it, was a titan of industry. Richard made his billions in chemical manufacturing and fracking. He was the kind of man who viewed environmental regulations as suggestions and human collateral damage as a line item on a spreadsheet. Richard was also the man who destroyed my father. 20 years ago, Richard's company, Apex Industries, performed a hostile takeover of my father's small biotech firm. They stripped it for patents, fired the entire staff, and liquidated the pension fund. My father, a proud man who had promised his employees security, couldn't live with the shame. He drove his car off a bridge 2 weeks after the ink dried. I was 15. I didn't scream. I didn't vow to kill Richard. I vowed to take from him exactly what he took from my father, his future. I spent the next decade curating the perfect resume. I earned a PhD in ethics and philosophy from Princeton. I became a renowned educator for the gifted and troubled children of the elite. When the position for a live-in tutor for Richard's estranged, difficult son opened up, I was the only candidate who fit the profile: discreet, overqualified, and seemingly harmless. Richard hired me during a 5-minute interview in which he never looked up from his phone. Fix the boy. Make him Ivy League material. I don't care how you do it, just don't bother me with the details. Understood, sir, I said, and I began my work. For the next 7 years, I was the father Julian never had. Richard was always in Tokyo or London or Davos. He bought Julian ponies he never rode and cars he couldn't drive, but he never asked him how his day was. I did. I helped Julian with his homework. I sat by his bed when he had the flu. I taught him how to tie a tie and how to talk to girls. But beneath the surface of this mentorship, I was planting seeds. I didn't preach hate. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I taught Julian critical thinking. When Richard's company was in the news for an oil spill, I didn't say, "Your dad is evil." I said, "Julian, let's analyze the ethical framework of this crisis. What is the utilitarian cost of this spill versus the shareholder profit? Who are the victims here?" I took him on field trips. We didn't go to museums. We went to the towns where Apex Industries had factories. I showed him the brown water. I introduced him to families with suspiciously high cancer rates, framing it as sociological research. I watched the horror dawn in his eyes over the years. I watched him struggle to reconcile the luxury he lived in with the suffering that paid for it. "Why doesn't Dad stop it?" he asked me when he was 15. "Because, Julian," I said softly, "power often blinds people to the consequences of their actions. It takes a very strong person to break that cycle, a hero." I molded him into that hero. I turned his teenage rebellion into a weaponized moral crusade. By the time he was 17, he wasn't just an angst-filled teen, he was a sleeper agent with a conscience. The endgame began on his 18th birthday. According to the family trust, Julian gained access to his shares and, crucially, a seat on the board of directors as a family observer. But more importantly, he gained unrestricted access to the family's private servers at the estate, access Richard never revoked because he still saw Julian as a harmless, incompetent child. "I want to make him proud," Julian told me the night before his birthday. "I want to show him I understand the business." "You will," I assured him. "You'll show him exactly who you are." I guided him. I showed him which folders to look for, the risk assessment files, the buried reports on toxic dumping in Southeast Asia, the bribes to foreign officials. Julian copied everything, terabytes of incriminating data that Richard thought were buried under layers of encryption and lawyers. 2 weeks ago, on the morning of Apex Industries' annual shareholder meeting, Julian didn't go to school. Instead, he walked into the offices of the New York Times and the Department of Justice with a hard drive. Simultaneously, he uploaded a video manifesto to YouTube. In it, he sat in his bedroom, the room I had tutored him in for 7 years, and renounced his inheritance. He apologized to the victims of his father's company. He looked into the camera and said, "My father is a criminal, and I will no longer be his shield." The fallout was nuclear. Apex stock plummeted 60% in an hour. The DOJ announced an immediate raid. Richard was arrested on the tarmac while trying to flee to a non-extradition country. His assets are frozen. His reputation is incinerated. He is facing life in prison for racketeering and environmental crimes. I watched it all from a cafe across the street from the Sterling estate. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. "I did it. I feel light. Thank you for opening my eyes. I couldn't have done it without you. You were the only one who ever told me the truth." I didn't reply. I deleted the number, threw the phone into the trash can, and hailed a cab. Julian thinks he's a savior. He thinks he made a choice. He doesn't realize that every thought in his head, every moral conviction, every ounce of his outrage was carefully constructed by me. I didn't just teach him history. I rewrote his personal narrative until he became the suicide bomber I needed to blow up his father's life. I robbed a father of his son and a son of his father. I used a lonely boy's desperation for love to destroy his family from the inside out. Richard is ruined. My father is avenged. And Julian, he's going to spend the rest of his life being the hero who betrayed his blood, never knowing he was just a puppet on a 7-year string. Am I a monster for weaponizing a child, or did I simply raise him to be a better man than his father ever was?